everyone, welcome to Hindsight Rewrites, where we dive into some B movies and have a little fun with them, change a bit of this, change a bit of that. If you would like a overview and the criteria that I'm using on these rewrites, go check out the intro video for the series, which is on the channel, and then come on back. Today's rewrite is for the fairly infamous Birdemic, directed by James Nguyen. Sorry, James, if I pronounce that wrong, no disrespect. This movie is gotten all sorts of reviews and treatments. It's gotten the rip tracks. It's gotten everything wrong with from CinemaSins. But I still wanted to go in and do a rewrite because what all these other things have done, the rip tracks and CinemaSins and so on, is they just bagged the shit out of it, and rightfully so to a certain degree. But I really at least with this film, we'll get more into the sequel and how I feel about that at that time. But for now, with this first film, I have a very high degree of respect for James and what he was able to do with this. And he also had two previous films to this, Replicas and Julian Jack. There is a great little documentary about James and Birdemic and how he was able to get some eyeballs on it, market it, so to speak, and just his determination that he has this dream. He had wanted to make movies, and he just did it. And that was made by Vice. It's on YouTube. I'll leave a link to that, and go check that out. It's really, really good, really well made, and gives you an insight onto this guy, and he's just wanting to follow his Hollywood dream. So let's go ahead and get into Birdemic here, and this is no disrespect. As with all the rewrites, we just want to play with it a little bit and see if we can have some fun. So James, all the respect in the world, let's get you a rewrite. Like I did with the Pod People rewrite for Decker Shadow, I'm going to be sending you to another review of this film. There's no shortage of them. But for this and the sequel, I'll be sending you to I Hate Everything, link in the description, like before. I just think, even though he's a little harsh and he yells at it a bit, he's still a little more insightful than some of the other reviews that just want to scream and holler and nothing else at the film. So go check him out, and then come on back. So starting with the poster, I am not a fan of this poster. I get you have limited resources, and that's fine. And he's actually has, if you go online, there's a few other, like where he's advertising some of the screenings and stuff that look really cool. But for this, I wanted to go with more like what Rip Tracks did for their poster, and with the red and the birds and things like that. So that's kind of the direction I would go with the rewrite, is in that vein of the Rip Tracks poster. As you can see, I put moon there instead of those power lines. The name of the town is Half Moon Bay, so I kind of wanted to incorporate that. And then obviously we got the black and the red birds and the title. So that's kind of the route I would go. And then real quick, I noticed with Pod People that ran a little long. So I'm probably going to be dividing, at least on most of these. Some I might not need to, but most of these, including this film, I'm going to be dividing into two rewrites or two parts, just so we're not having so long with each one. And then also when I did that whole where I would step away to explain like some of the changes, I'm going to just do that kind of as we're going, instead of like, oh, I'm going to stop and then go back. So I'll just explain some of the changes as I'm making them, as we're just kind of floating through the movie. So with that, let's get into our rewrite. So we begin our film from black, and we fade in to this establishing shot of a beach, just people having a good time. And right before we cut to another shot, we hear the screeching birds, or a single bird, to be more exact, going, doing its thing, ah, ah, ah. And we cut to these people who are from a later scene, but like with most all these rewrites, we're going to be repurposing some of the extras or backup roles. And so you got these three characters, and they're just standing there and they're looking up at this bird who is just freaking the hell out, being a little more aggressive. And they're like, what the hell is going on? and then the bird actually comes in to go for them, and they are just scared out of their gourd, and they're not sure what to do. This thing is acting well outside of what they usually do. They're not usually this aggressive if you're not like messing with their eggs or whatever. So this bird is going all sorts of freaking crazy, and he's just on this trio of characters like nobody's business, and they are screaming for help. They're trying to get away, but this thing is just right on them. And then out of nowhere, a tranq dart slips right through the air and hits the bird, causing it to fall to the ground with a bit of a thud. So we hold on the bird on the ground for a few moments, and then cut to Dr. Jones holding the tranq gun. Now we don't meet him in the original till way later, but with this cold open and with some other bits where I'm going to throw him in this front half, so we don't feel so disjointed. Like here's a love story, here's a disaster. We have just little tidbits leading up towards that major, towards the Birdemic, as it were. So after Dr. Jones asks the group if they're all right, we cut back to the bird on the ground, and we get voiceover from two of the group members asking the doctor if he knows why the bird attacked. Then we cut to the center woman, again just mimicking what her friends there just asked, really freaked out. Why did it attack? What's going on? We come back to Dr. Jones, who has moved closer to where the bird went down in front of the other edge of this group, this other lady behind him, and he replies that he's not sure, but he can tell them one thing. And we cut back to the center gal, and she's like, "What's that?" And we go back to Dr. Jones. "This is just the beginning." After he says that, we fade to black and come into our title card, which the original through the dash of Rod's car, that's a no-no. We're not doing that. So we'll cut to our black from Dr. Jones, and we'll cut into this new title card with the red that mimics that new poster. So here's where I might be stretching a little bit on what James was able to do, since he did do most of those opening credits through the interior of the car, but I'd rather do watching the car move through the countryside first, and that's where we get our cast credits to pop up while the car is out in the country. Then we get it moving into town, and you get your production credits. I know we had pretty much everybody that worked on the movie in those opening ones, and that's why they ran on for quite some time. And you can do that with a smaller cast and a smaller crew, but it seems like he had quite a few that he needed to throw in there. So do your basics, do your mains, and then we can do everybody else in the end credits. In the original, he shows Rod park and get out and walk to the diner. As you can see, our little guy there is telling us that's a no-no. I'm not against like establishing actions and things like that, but it just seemed to go on a little longer, and we're trying to just really trim this up and get to the things that matter. So after we show him move into town at the back end of those production credits, we will just hit an establishing of the diner. So after we established the diner sign, we'll show Rod walking in, and then he has that very infamous at this point interaction with the waitress, who isn't dubbed very well. I'm not going to get into too many technical stuff with the audios and things, touch on it here and there like I've done in the previous rewrite. So basically, just with our hindsight, we would quiet the crowd down so that we could actually hear her, or dub it better in post or whatever, and that's about the extent of how I'm going to touch on that. So our waitress greets her customer as he walks in, and he reciprocates with a hi as well, just like in the original, and she shows him to a booth. So once Rod is seated, the waitress gets him a menu and tells him the specials, and then leaves him to it. So while he's looking over the menu, Rod notices a beautiful woman sitting near him, and unlike the original where he's just more stalkery than anything else, he gets more of a inquisitive type look like like when you see somebody, you're pretty sure you know, but you're not quite sure. More along those lines versus, oh, pretty girl. Ooh, not a fan of that. I don't think they were trying to go that way. That's just how it came across. It is what it is. So we stick with more of that inquisitive, where he's just kind of eyeing her over, like glancing down at the menu a bit as well, and just like trying to figure out where he knows her from. So she finishes up and heads out, and we do not have Rod stare at her intently, like all kinds of creepy. When she walks out, that is all kinds of no. So no, no, Rod, you cannot do that. At this point, our waitress returns and asks if he has decided what he like. Rod politely tells her that he'll be right back, and goes ahead and heads out to try to catch up with this woman that he thinks he knows from somewhere. Now, this can be a bit on the oopsie or shady, problematic, whatever you want to call it, side as well. But he recognizes her and he wants to see. So we have to have him do it in a as nice a way as possible, as opposed to in the original movie. As you see here, he just kind of tracks her down and like touch her. That is all sorts of no. You can get close enough to her and just be like, hey, excuse me, miss, or something along those lines. Um, so you can kind of, address people in public and use this in your real life. Um, but, there are lines. So after getting her attention in this more proper or nice way, Rod asks um, her name. He's like, I know this sounds really weird. You look really familiar. Could I get your name? She's not really wanting to give that up. She's a little taken back, as any of us would be if this happened, even in a nice way, at a grocery store or something. So he goes a little further. He's like, well, I'm fairly sure it's from high school. Then she comes a little more at ease because she's a little quicker on the draw than him. And she's like, that's right. Rod, right? I do remember from high school. I'm Natalie. We were in chemistry class together. In the original, after their initial interaction, she kind of goes back towards her car and he follows, like, just, again, all the kinds of creepy, and that's a no. So we're just going to have them walking together towards her car, reminiscing about their school days, and then when they get to her car, he will, again, very polite, like, hey, it was really nice catching up. Would you like to do so again, maybe over dinner or coffee or whatever? Um, Reluctantly, but she's again a little more at ease because now she recognizes him. They've been talking for a little bit. She's like, sure, and she gives him her card. Now, since we didn't use this up during our opening, after Natalie leaves, now we can have Rod walk back to the diner because he's still hungry. And then from there, we will dissolve to him sitting in his kitchen the next day. So, in addition to playing homage to Alfred Hitchcock's The Birds, James also wanted to convey a message with this film about something that's near and dear to him, which is global warming. He wants to raise awareness, as we all do, to whatever our message is in our films, and I'm going to respect that. However, I'm not a fan of the ham-fisted manner in which he did it. Um, I'm all for having a message in your film, but just like nobody wants to watch Big Bird basically just recite from a math book on TV, they want to see fun little skits that teach the kids about the numbers and stuff. The same thing with these messages in these movies. You can't grind your movie to a halt for your message. You have to slip it in there, weave it in with your story. Now, these sections where James just has Rod watching TV and they're having like a story about the global warming or something, that's fine. That's probably the best areas where he has his message weaved into the movie. So we're going to stick with that. We're just changing the aesthetic of it to the more traditional video up in the corner as opposed to that TV just sitting next to the lady. And instead of polar bears, just more of a broader thing, so we're not pulling away from the birds too much. Where she's just talking about the ice caps and melting, which screws with animal environments. After watching the news report, Rod turns the TV off and heads off to work. Um, Again, in the original, this is just so drug out. He goes to the gas station, he's stuck in traffic, etc., etc., etc. So we'll just have him come out, get in his car, and we'll kind of just cut to him leaving, which is fine, and then an establishing of his work, and that will be good without all the extra stuff in the middle. So in the original film, Rod gets quite animated here at work because he's making these huge sales with these exaggerated numbers. Now I'm not saying that people in sales don't make these $1 million accounts and so forth, but for the purposes of our movie and what we're wanting to do with Rod, we don't want him to be a millionaire because we don't really convey that in other parts of the film. We want to just be your run-of-the-mill dude um, doing his job and making a few sales. So here we're introduced to Rick, who is Rod's friend and coworker, and they're just talking back and forth during sort of a little mini break between calls. And they mention a meeting that's upcoming with the top brass where they'll all be handed bonuses based on their sales. So Rod gets back to work, and we dissolve to this close-up of the photo studio where Natalie's at. Now I'm going with this close-up as opposed to the wider reveal that we get in the original film, just because even though we're not going for super fancy, I still want it to look like a photo-specific place as opposed to mixed in with like a convenience store. So from our close-up of the studio, we cut to inside where Natalie is getting some photographs done. She's still a model in this version. She's just like Rod, we're scaling her back. So she's not Victoria's Secrets or anything like that. She's just getting started out. So she's here getting a few photos taken for her portfolio to circulate around in efforts to get an agent. So in our new context, we don't need the agent right this second because we're not having her call to talk about the Victoria's Secret thing. So we're taking her out for now. She'll come back later. But for now, we're taking her out, and we're just going to cut from Natalie doing pictures to Rod getting out of work, and then he'll get into his car, get the card that Natalie gave him, and give her a call to see if she wants to get together as they discussed earlier. So Natalie gets the call, and like I mentioned, Rod is just asking if she wants to get together, reminisce some more, maybe over dinner. She, even though being more comfortable than she was, obviously earlier, she's still not quite sure. So Rod suggests, well, maybe like a group thing or a double date with my friend Rick and his girlfriend Mai. And Natalie asked Mai's last name. Rod tells her, and she's like, "Oh, small world. She's in my yoga class. Sure, let's do a double date with them." So after Natalie hangs up, we come back to Rod, and real quick, I just want to mention that I know it's an issue in a lot of the reviews, the whole coincidence that their friends are also dating, but we spin that just a little in our context where it's more of an acquaintance thing, and it is a small town, so we just keep that in mind. This Half Moon Bay is a smaller town, so those kind of coincidences are just going to happen sometimes. So we cut from Rod being done with the phone call to him and Rick playing a little basketball. Not very well, but they're playing it. And then they stop and talk about their upcoming double date. While they're walking over to the fence there, they're just shooting ideas back and forth about what to do on the double date, and they finally land on checking out a new movie in town. It's like a disaster movie in the vein of 2012 or The Day After Tomorrow, something like that. And then they're just talking back and forth about the date and what Rod likes about Natalie. None of that creepy sex talk that was Rick did in the original. So they just do that, and then we dissolve into our date after the movie when they're walking back into the parking lot. So in the original, they referenced that the movie they just watched was Inconvenient Truth by Al Gore. Like CinemaSins pointed out, the timing doesn't line up with that for Inconvenient Truth's theatrical run. And then on top of that, I wanted to go with more of a less ham-fisted, more fictional type movie that they watched, that they can still discuss some of those themes, like in those movies I mentioned earlier, 2012, Day After Tomorrow, but it was weaved a little more in to the plot. So nothing against Al or his film, but we're going to go this other direction. So they're on their way back from the movie, just walking to their cars, and they're discussing what they just saw, as you do with a group after you've seen a movie. And we got to Rod and Natalie there. They're a little more comfortable holding hands. And Rod's just saying, hey, I really love the action and the acting and all that, but what caused that global disaster really has me shaking a bit because if we don't do something, that could be our world. Rick echoes the sentiment, adding that if we're not careful, the movie's fiction could become our reality. Then the couples just decide to call it a night and part ways for the evening. When Rod and Natalie leave, that will dissolve into some B-roll of the town at night. And their second date could be the next night, it could be a couple nights later, whichever. But now that they're a little more comfortable from that double date, now they're out on a regular date with just each other. Like in the original, they use this date to get to know each other a little better, asking about the modeling, asking about Rod's sales, and so forth, and just all the things that you do on those first dates. They're a little awkward, but they're not quite as much because of the double before, and they're just having a good time enjoying each other's company. So what I want to do here after dinner is show them walking home at night, but not hear them. I want some music going, and their body language, hand gestures, things like that, just conveying how comfortable they are with each other, and that we're getting that spark of romance between them. So they end the night with Natalie giving Rod a kiss on the cheek, and that will fade into an establishing of this treehouse in the woods. From the treehouse, we get this shot of two birds now on the ground, and back up to a character who, again, in the original, we don't meet till later. His name's Tom Hill. He's also known as a tree hugger in the credits, and he is just very torn up about having to take him down, even though it is just trank darts. As a dejected Tom looks down at what he just had to do, we hear from off screen a voice say, "So, any theories?" So we cut to reveal that it's Dr. Jones continuing his research into the birds from that cold open, and he just further addresses Tom by saying, "So I have a few theories of my own, but I'd really love to hear what you think." Now here we're going to establish that there's a bit of tension or history between them. Tom holds up his hands. "Since when do you give a shit what I think?" To an apologetic but still fairly firm tone, Dr. Jones replies, "Look, I've made no shortage of mistakes in my past, including anything involving you, but we have to look beyond that right now and work together to figure out what's going on with these birds." Tom is still visibly upset, but backs off and agrees. "You're right. We do have to work together to figure this out. You asked if I had a theory? Well, I have to warn you, it's a little out there." From there, we fade into some black. So we fade in from the black to Rod sitting in his house, once again watching TV. And like before, we're not giving this a thumbs down because of the message or anything, just because of the aesthetic. So instead of that, he's watching like a commercial for a hybrid car, because now Rod is kind of inspired by that movie to do what he can to make a difference. The doorbell ringing takes Rod's attention from the commercial, and he goes to greet his guest, who is a salesman he had called to come talk to him about solar panels. So Rod invites his guest in, and they begin to discuss the solar panels, pretty much just everything about them. They have a lengthy conversation on their cost, the process of installing, and just so on. They come outside, and the salesman begins to point out kind of where he would put the panels should Rod buy them. Then they get into the cost a little more, and Rod is just not quite comfortable with the cost. He wants to do it after seeing that movie and wanting to do something about the environment, but he just can't afford them at that time. So the salesman thanks him for his time, and they part ways. From Rod and the salesman's handshake, we dissolve to this house where Natalie's walking in the front door. It turns out to be her mother's house, and they greet each other with a hug and just a hi and things like that. And then Natalie's mom begins to ask her how things are going with the modeling or just life in general. Natalie starts by telling her mom about Rod and their date and how she thinks maybe he could be the one. And then her phone rings, and we cut to the modeling agency, which again we moved from earlier to now. And the agent is just informing Natalie that she's gotten a hold of her pictures that she took at the studio and wants to sign her as a client. After the call, Natalie tells her mom about the good news, and her mom gives her a good job and a big old thumbs up that we hold on as we dissolve to an exterior of Rod's work. From the exterior, we cut to the boardroom where we're not going to have this just huge clap fest and outrageous numbers, with sales and stock options and all the rest. This is that meeting that they referenced earlier, and it's just the boss telling everybody what their quarterly numbers are and then announcing that Rod was the top salesperson for that quarter and that he's going to get a bonus on top of the regular bonus that everybody else is getting. We do get some clapping from Rod's coworkers, but just some mild stuff like you would get when somebody announces good news at a meeting. And then Rod goes up to shake his boss's hand, and we hold on that and fade into the beginnings of a montage sequence. Our montage will take us through a few various events that happen over the next few days, and that starts with Rod and Natalie on a date at this pumpkin festival where they, just meander through the crowd, enjoy some of the exhibits, watch the parade, and then it stops. At least this portion of it stops with them kind of looking at this nice picture, and then from there we get to Rod at work, where in between doing his normal job, he is researching solar energy for a new idea that he has. Then we'll go to some more Rod and Natalie developing their relationship to the point where Natalie introduces Rod to her mother and they have a nice little chat with her. So the next stage of our montage will show what Natalie's doing outside of dating Rod, which is now that she's got this agency gig, they've gotten her shoot for advertising at a local business, and she's doing some pictures for them, getting her modeling career up and going. And then we end the montage with an exterior of this office building. So in the building, Rod is giving a presentation for his new project, which is Mass Solar. He's already pumped his entire bonus into this project and is now seeking some extra funding from this group. The idea of his project is to bring solar energy down, the cost of it down for the masses, hence the name. And all he's looking to do is have some more streamlined manufacturing, maybe get some cheaper but still not too cheap materials so that they can just get those costs down so that more people can afford the solar energy. After some discussion amongst themselves, the group decides to invest in the project, stating that this will be a good step for their company to get into the clean energy business. Rod is elated and he thanks him over and over as we dissolve to some B-roll of the town at night. Inside a restaurant, Rod and Natalie are celebrating their individual life successes with the Mass Solar and the modeling while continuing to just flourish in their relationship, now very comfortable with each other as opposed to the origins. And after just enjoying each other's company thoroughly, Natalie reaches across and puts her hand on Rod and they share a loving look. On cue, the restaurant singer begins to do his thing, starting with an upbeat song that prompts Natalie and Rod to get up and dance. In the original, it's just them and the singer, and I wanted more of a fun, busy environment, at least at the beginning of this scene. So, in tradition with what we've done in other rewrite and in this one earlier, I wanted to take some extras that we have in other scenes and put them into this one as like extra dancing people. But I couldn't get a great picture of some of these extras that I were going to pull from the office scene that we didn't use. So I just went ahead and did some stock people from the internet, just some random stock images. However, this would be in our reshooting or rewrite would be those people from the office that we didn't use earlier doing the dancing. Our large group dancing scene will then dissolve into the singer having now changed tones to a slower, more romantic song, and we have now just Natalie and Rod, sometime later by themselves, just dancing, holding each other, looking lovingly into each other's eyes. From there, we will get to them going to their hotel room, and Natalie and Rod dressing down. Natalie shows off like, "Hey, do you like it?" This time, instead of looking like a confused idiot, Rod will just be like, happy, excited, just like you would be. And then they just start to kiss, but we're not going to show them on the bed. I mean, we know what they're going to do. and we just fade to the moonlight. So here's where I'm going to cut off the part one, which is also where the original kind of divides itself between the love story and the Birdemic. Hopefully you've enjoyed some of the nuggets we've thrown in there, hinting with like Dr. Jones and Tom Hill at the Birdemic, the shock and terror yet to come, and just toning down some of the creepy-ish elements of the love story, which I don't think James meant any intention or harm to make it that way. It just, some of these things get lost in translation for anybody trying to portray a love story. There's a lot of nuance and things in there. So I'm not going to fault him on that end of it. It's just like, we do have that gift of hindsight, and we have to remember that. On a final note, just please like, comment, subscribe. It really helps us out. And if you're so inclined, the Patreon will be linked in the description. If not, that's cool as well. I will see you all next time with Hindsight Rewrite.